All right, ladies and gentlemen, we are about ready to begin the afternoon session where we will have two panelists here and then one who is being Skyped in from California. We're very happy about that. So if I could ask for everyone's attention, double check maybe all of your cell phones are either turned off or on vibrate would be helpful as well. We're just waiting for our videographer and then we can begin. Are we rolling? Okay.
Okay.
Okay, so I'll say a few words, yeah. So then just give me the signal, Darnell, and I'll say a few words. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for the afternoon session where we really have a treat today for a special interactive discussion on the topic, the practice of cultural diplomacy and a comprehensive smart power strategy to assure national security. We're joined by three guests, one who will be here any moment now. The chairman of the panel is Ambassador Andras Simonyi. Ambassador Simonyi is currently serving as the managing director of the Center for Transatlantic Relations at the Paul Nietzsche School of Advanced International Studies, Johns Hopkins University, and previously served as the Hungarian ambassador to the United States from 2002 until 2007. After his time at the university, Ambassador Simonyi worked with many youth exchange programs in the State Committee for Youth, the Bureau for World Federation Democratic Youth, a frontline organization with a special interest in forging ties between youth organizations of the East and the West, which brought him in contact with the American Council of Young Political Leaders. But I think he's most famous for really being a cultural diplomat, in the sense really we've had many conversations, and he's told me quite passionately, growing up in Hungary under communism, how really rock and roll in many ways had more of an impact on him than politics. So in that sense, it's perfect that you're here with us today to chair this interactive discussion. And Ambassador Simonyi, I've prepared a brief bio for Ambassador Dobrianski and Jeff Baxter. However, would you prefer to say a few words from your side? Or
it's okay. Skunk, can you hear us?
Got you loud and clear.
Okay, great.
So
why don't you do the introduction?
All right, so a few words. So first of all, ladies and gentlemen, Jeff Skunk Baxter is an American guitarist, known for his stints in the rock bands Steely Dan and the Doobie Brothers during the 70s. More recently, he has been working as a defense consultant and chairs the Congressional Advisory Board on Missile Defense. In 1995, Mr. Baxter was nominated to chair the Civilian Advisory Board for Ballistic Missile Defense and has since played a large role in the U.S. defense sector. Mr. Baxter's work with that panel led to consulting contracts with the Pentagon's Missile Defense Agency and National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. He now consults to the U.S. Department of Defense and the U.S. intelligence community, as well as defense-oriented manufacturers. In April 2005, Mr. Baxter joined the NASA Exploration Systems Advisory Committee and is currently a senior fellow and a member of the Board of Regents at the Potomac Institute for Policy Studies. He also occasionally plays in the Coalition of the Willing, a band comprising Ambassador Simonyi, former Hungarian ambassador to the United States, Alexander Vershbow, U.S. ambassador to South Korea, Daniel B. Poonman, formerly the United States National Security Council and now of the Scowcroft Group, and Lincoln Bloomfield, former United States Assistant Secretary of State for Political Military Affairs. And we'll learn more about that later, but that's the real cultural diplomacy that Ambassador Simonyi and Jeff the Skunk Baxter were involved with. We'll be joined shortly by Ambassador Paula Dobrianski. Ambassador Dobrianski is an American foreign policy expert who has served both in key roles as a diplomat and policymaker in the administrations of 5 U.S. presidents, both Democrat and Republican. She is a specialist in the areas of Eastern Europe and the former Soviet Union, as well as of political and military affairs. She previously served as Undersecretary of State for Democracy and Global Affairs from 2001 until 2009, and she is currently a senior fellow at the Belfer Center for Science and International Affairs at Harvard University's John F. Kennedy School of Government, as well as senior international affairs and trade advisor at the law firm Baker Hosteller. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, I'd like us to please give a very, very warm welcome for Jeff the Skunk Baxter and Ambassador Andras Simonyi. Thank you.
All right, so let's get started. Thank you, Mark, for the introduction. Ambassador Dobrianski is running just a little late. She's on her way, so she will be joining us in a couple of minutes. What we thought today is, you know, the advantage of being out of real diplomacy is that, you know, I can do a lot of things I was not allowed to do when I was an ambassador. For example, I can improvise a lot. When you're an ambassador, you're not allowed to improvise. Only when you're actually playing in the band where our musical director Skunk Baxter allows us to improvise, but that's besides the point. What we want to do here is bring alive the whole idea and whole concept of culture and diplomacy, real world diplomacy, crossing paths. What we also want to do is to get you a better understanding why some of us are seriously why some of us seriously believe that hard power and soft power actually fit together, and if there is a good understanding of hard power, the better we are able to use soft power. We like to think of ourselves, Skunk, Paula, myself, as if you want, pioneers of a new concept. And if you want, and Skunk, I'll give you the floor immediately. If you want, as a matter of fact, the band we put together here in Washington was damn serious. It has a message. I had a special message about what rock and roll meant to me as a young boy behind the Iron Curtain. But then we figured out it has an amazing ability to help me communicate with the American people as a diplomat, as a top Hungarian diplomat. I wouldn't have been able to do it without the support and understanding of some of my best friends, Skunk, Ling Bloomfield, who was then Assistant Secretary of State, Dan Poneman, who, as a matter of fact, he moved from, I think that's a little outdated, that CV you read out, because he's the Deputy Secretary of Energy as we speak, the number 2 in the Energy Department, and our drummer Sandy Vershbow, he also moved on from Korea, first to be the Assistant Secretary of Defense, and now he is the Deputy Secretary General of NATO, believe it or not. Between meetings of the NATO Council, he is practicing with his chopsticks, so that he is, he keeps up with his drumming. But the bottom line is, what we want to do is discuss with you this whole concept of soft power, hard power. And Skunk, would you please come in now and say a few words?
Well, since you gave me my headset back here. Yeah, the first time, you hear me okay?
We're good.
Hold on one second here. There we go. Okay. First time that I ever got involved with soft power was reading an article by Joseph Nye in the Foreign Affairs Quarterly, and found myself fascinated by Joseph Nye's article and by his precepts, and realized that after my experiences playing around the world and touring, oh, there's Paul, and then playing especially in the Soviet Union before it became Russia, understanding that he was not only right, but his ideas were very powerful, and in a coordinated and conceptual fashion, I think that they could be, and found that they could be, very effective in terms of opening up communication, really, more than anything else, between peoples of different philosophies, governmental focuses, and things like that. So all I can say is I'm a big fan of Joe Nye. We got to be friends, and I think he's a very smart guy. And his concept is probably one of the most important ideas to come from the latter part of the 20th century in terms of world communications.
Thank you. Yeah, I'd like to welcome Ambassador Dobrianski. Paula, we already, kind of made the first round of introductions, but I'd like you to come in and and explain to the audience how does this whole soft power, hard power thing come together in your mind, and you as the longest serving Undersecretary of State ever, how did this affect your work?
First, let me say good afternoon to all of you, and my apologies for being late. And hi, Jeff.
Hi, Paula.
This is an important issue, and I think it's really great that the Institute is focused in on it. Thank you. You asked asked me the question about how it factored in my line of work. There were so many areas relative to soft power that I think made a difference in terms of forging the best of different cultures, of different people, of also tackling issues and problems. Let me give one of the areas, health. I remember at the time of avian influenza, there were a lot of countries grappling with what avian influenza meant, how it impacted them. And actually, a coalition had been set up, a health coalition, during my time. And specifically, the purpose of that coalition was to share not only information about avian influenza, but also to look at the data, to look at also the viral samples, also to provide resources and assistance in different areas. In particular, I remember one of the first meetings, actually, after it was announced that there was going to be such a coalition, one of the first meetings was in Europe. And you'll all be interested to know that a number of the countries that stepped forward actually were a number of African countries and said, well, what about us? You know, we have representatives from the World Health Organization on the ground, and we have other representatives, but how can we come together? So in an area like health, I know we're here at the Institute, Cultural Diplomacy, but, you know, to factor in an area like that, it really can make a difference. It made a difference, and I'll give you a graphic example and way in this particular area. At the time that this coalition was announced one year, there were only about 30 preparedness plans, you know, for dealing with avian influenza. A year later, after the coalition was set up, there were close to 100 and about 30, 140 preparedness plans. What that meant is that countries were really, you know, elevating the importance of it in their own society and their awareness. Secondly, that they were also working out a blueprint for action of how to deal with it. And basically, countries were able to benefit from one another's sharing of these experiences. So that's just one example in this case. Another example that I would give, if I may, that's one. But let me give another one in an area that also actually really matters in terms of I'd say when there are those countries that step forward and provide assistance. I look at just outright humanitarian assistance. And in the area of humanitarian assistance, particularly when a country is impacted by, say, a tsunami or an earthquake, look at the data, if you will, for the country of Pakistan. And if you look at Pakistan and basically Pakistan's own outlook on Americans, it hasn't been very positive, I have to say. But do you know, after the recent earthquake, this was not too long ago, it was interesting that when Pakistanis were polled, actually the impact of the immediacy of our gesture of mobilizing, putting in resources, helping people whose lives were virtually shattered given that earthquake and the scale and the scope of it. So that's a kind of element of soft power that I think what I'm trying to convey is first of all, it gives a very human dimension and a human touch to, at times, what can very much preoccupy us in some very hard-nosed issues, you know, that we're grappling with on a day-to-day basis. I mean, those would just be two examples that I would give.
I'd like to tell you that in my mind, and I guess the three of us were in agreement, soft power maybe as a misnomer. It is not as soft as people think. It's not soft at all. Just think about the amazing impact American and Western culture had in Central Eastern Europe in the 50s, 60s, and the 70s, and leading up to the changes in '89, where you would say rock and roll and Levi's did almost as much to change the minds of young people, generations, as did the mere fact that there was an East-West confrontation. Having said that, it's amazing that the music, and that's really in 19 when was the first Steely Dan record you played on? 70?
That would have been 71 or 72.
71,
I think,
72. And, honestly, when I was holding that LP in Budapest in 1971, 72, I had no idea that once we would be getting together and talking about the impact of this with Skunk. But the bottom line is, it had an incredible impact on me and many millions of Central and Eastern Europeans. And I just want you to understand, it was hard. The impact of soft power was really very hard, because you don't know how much time, effort, money, energy, manpower, ideologues had to spend in Central Europe to try to figure out how to counter this amazing impact of rock and roll culture. The fact is, whatever they did, they couldn't, because it cut through the barbed wire, it cut through the Iron Curtain. Skunk, and here I'd like to. You guys were one of the first to play in Russia, right? As a major Western rock band. Could you say a few words about that?
Well, the Doobie Brothers were included in a tour that was put together in 1987 to play on a large soccer stadium in front of about 40,000 folks outside of Moscow. Was an interesting experience because the Soviet Union at the time was fairly closed and didn't really appreciate the input, as you've already explained, of outside cultural influences. So we were very surprised when we not only were as accepted as we were, but when we found that literally everyone in the audience knew every word to every song that we played. So obviously the state had not been very successful in cutting their population off from the influence and the input from outside culture. And that was only the first of a number of opportunities that we had taken advantage of to play around the world. And let me say one thing that's fascinated me. I think we're in stage 3 of the soft power revolution. Stage 1 was, like we say, Western culture somehow being introduced into societies where they were being, to be kind, protected from outside influence. Now we have something called world music, which, because artists and creative people from other cultures and other societies have been able to get an input from the Western musicians and artists, they have now taken that and built upon that and created their own kinds of music. Iranian rap bands, Iraqi rock and roll, bands out of China that are playing rock and roll, the blues. The number one, I think Tito Puente is in a band, a Latin salsa band in Japan that won the award for best salsa band. So what's happened is other people have taken this and morphed it into something that they can be involved in. Now what's happening is we're seeing people from other societies that now create their music and their own movies and their own books and their own entertainment and cultural products based on not only the influence from the Western part of the input, but becoming original and being on sort of the shoulders of the people that came before them. So what's fascinating to me now is this is no longer just a one-way street. People like Sting and people like that are now, artists like that are inculcating and using, involving other musical cultures. So I think we've come into the third stage of this, which tells me two things. One, people like it. And number two, it's impossible to escape.
Well, yeah. I would also say that don't forget that rock and roll music originally had its roots in African American music. It had its roots in bluegrass, Central European polka dot. All that stuff came together. What I want to say is, I don't want to suggest that rock and roll rock and roll in itself is the tool, is the universal tool that works everywhere. I'm glad you mentioned the fact that rock and roll music as such is being transformed and shaped to the cultures of the countries, but it's still rock and roll. But think of rock and roll as a metaphor. Don't think of rock and roll as just the kind, it's not just the kind of music. Rock and roll is the YouTube is the new rock and roll, Facebook, Twitter, all this comes together. And if you think of rock and roll metaphorically, something that can reach out to millions and millions of people, where governments are not, definitely they try, but they're actually not able to control it and have and project the message of freedom. That's what I call rock and roll. Just think about this. For me, rock and roll music in the 60s was exactly the same tool of communication with my peers in the West as Twitter and YouTube is for today's generations in countries that are still cut off from freedom and democracy.
Andras, I wanted to make a comment and then pose a question to both of you, or challenge you a little bit, to be a little bit of devil's advocate. But the comment I wanted to make is, when I came in, I heard you, Jeff, talk about Joe Nye, and Joe Nye was a professor of mine and really has this, as you know, the terrific book about soft power. I teach a class, and the class is actually on global issues and national security threats, and we look at soft power issues, and that's my core book that I use in the class. And the reason why I'm mentioning it is because it's interesting, his own definition. He talks about soft power being elements of one's policy that's attractive to another, that it's attractive, that it has an influence, it has an impact. And that's why when you asked me, okay, talk about, the hat that I had of global affairs and government in the State Department, and then, how does this relate to soft power? I mean, what the kind of work that we were doing on health, I think it was something that was attractive, it was meaningful to others, it was impactful. Not even just on this issue about perceptions of how people saw us, but it was influencing and bettering people's lives. And I think that all of that mix was a very important instrument. All right, so devil's advocate for both of you. We're hearing, all of us here in this room, about rock and roll and the influence, if you will, of popular culture. Now, what do you say to a number of people who say, well, no, that's not the case? We might like Steely Dan and we might like your music, but that doesn't mean that we like your policies. So, what do you say to that? I mean, give the audience a sense of, where do you come from on that? Is there consistency all the time? Is it only sometimes? I mean, because I know friends that I've had, be it in Russia, friends in the Middle East, and they might like certain aspects of the music and certain aspects of popular culture at large, but that doesn't translate into their embracing or feeling, well, yes, we like this about, say, the United States in terms of X, Y, or Z policies. How do you
Paula,
answer
I'll take
that?
it a step further. It's the genie out of the bottle. In the same way as bebop and progressive jazz led, in a sense, to people going, my parents' generation be very upset about the what they believed to be the influences behind that, which then created rock and roll. Once you give somebody the opportunity to be creative, the tools to do it with, and the ability and the media outlet to have a place for the cultural conventions, so to speak, to be realized, then the genie is out of the bottle. As a matter of fact, I would say that in many cases, the music, movies, use of entertainment technology, and taking advantage of the creative process will create something maybe totally opposite of what a Western person from the West might want. But to me, it's more important to have the creative tools and the creative opportunities out there to let people communicate whatever they believe, because the ultimate concept of freedom is, especially in the United States, is that everyone has a voice, no matter if they disagree or not. The idea is to give people the tools so that they can best manifest that voice. Like I say, I would take what you're saying a step further.
Okay, good.
I you know, it's well, I'm glad you took this first because I totally agree, and I tell you why. Because when we looked at a rock band, you know, three guys on stage, you know, three guitars and then and the fourth with the drummer, that was really the message of freedom of expression, freedom. It was never about policy. It was always about values. You know, what does that represent to me? To me, it represented openness, freedom. It represented my the freedom to say whatever I want on stage. Because don't forget, improvisation. When you improvise on stage, that's the ultimate level of freedom. Well, let me tell you a little story. In the 50s, and believe it or not, this is a true story. In the 50s, the Hungarian secret police had a small unit called the Improv Police, and they would go around in jazz clubs, and if they found the jazz musicians improvising, they would take away their instruments. And then there was this jazz musician, a friend of mine, an older friend of mine, who actually who tells a story. They were naturally improvising as a jazz band. The police comes in and they said, hey, stop, you're not supposed to improvise. And they said, you know, comrade, you're wrong. This is a Russian folk song, and the Soviet comrades would be very disappointed if they heard that you stopped us in the middle of their song. And guess what? The police disappeared, and of course it was an American jazz tune. So
Well,
that's really my answer.
Well, I wanted to put that out there because I was sort of thinking, I'm looking at all of you and sort of, what are you thinking, you know, as they're presenting this, you know, if you are in agreement, what do you think? I mean, I think they've raised some very, very good points on this, and, you know, for looking at particularly that area of soft power, because
Okay,
there
well,
are different elements.
Okay,
Yeah.
go ahead. Let's let the audience ask questions
Or make comments.
or make comments.
Or refute what you've heard. Yes, the gentleman back there at the camera. Oh, yeah, great. Right on the camera. He's got the word. Well, what? Well, speak loudly.
Just speak loud.
My name is Darnell Summers. I'm from Detroit. Background. I'm also a musician. My brother Bill Summers, very famous percussionist, played with Herbie Hancock, Sting, Michael Jackson, you name it, he's played with them. Won Grammys. He also wrote for and we grew up together, obviously. The Motor City. I think we should also consider that if we talk about rock and roll, we talk about bluegrass, talk about music from the Ozarks, whatever we talk about here, we're talking about music that comes from the quote-unquote lower classes. I had the honor to meet Johnny Otis. In fact, I played in a band with his son John. And what needs to be pointed out here is that rock and roll, and it's kind of it's an irony that you talk about the difficulties you had in your country, but in the country of origin of rock and roll, and race music and R&B, came out of discrimination. Johnny Otis told me that when he was traveling with his band, he was the only white person in the band, that they had to go in the back doors of certain establishments, that they couldn't go in certain towns, you know. So everything that is being criticized about quote unquote the East or the Soviet bloc actually happened after the birth of that particular art form in America. So we have on both ends of the stick, if you will, this attempt to suppress the music. In fact, in the South, we talk about rock and roll. I mean, people were steadfastly against it, did all types of things to try to thwart its growth. They called it nigger music, or all types of different derogatory and derisive terms were used to describe this music. And to this day, even in the instance of rap music, we have people in Congress trying to ban the music. You know, so these questions of suppression of art forms.
Testing.
these are questions of the suppression of art forms. It spans any particular society or political system. And United States has had a very terrible history, actually, when it comes to the art forms of so-called minorities.
Yeah, I feel that I have to cut in here. I mean, I just like to caution you not ever to compare the situation that we lived in behind the Iron Curtain and the problems that you wanted. The expression of rock and roll in America was the expression that American youth wanted a better democracy. We in Eastern Europe, we wanted democracy, period. And that's a big difference. For you, the rock and roll was the messenger of a new, improved, freer, more tolerant, racially more tolerant society. And that's why you ended up having an African-American president. In Eastern Europe, we just had to fight against real suppression. You cannot compare the problems that even in the worst days, you could not compare the problems that we faced or the Soviet Union faced. So I just wanted to make sure that we have been thinking about this a lot, but I would just say that whatever rock and roll music has the life of its own, and thank God we didn't always think of the ideological or political background that it had. It just had an incredible message of hope for us in Central and Eastern Europe. Next question, please. Yes, please.
Sherry Mueller. In some ways, one of the lessons to take away is that the process of presenting cultural diplomacy, if you will, has a great impact on those who present it and on host communities. For example, I'm part of something called the National Council for International Visitors, 95 community organizations all around the U.S. It was very interesting in Atlanta, for example, hosting some of the African leaders of newly independent states on the State Department's International Visitor Leadership Program in the 60s helped integrate some of the venues in Atlanta. So it's very interesting to look at cultural diplomacy from the point of view of what happens to the hosts in the process of what they think they're going about doing. And I just wanted to ask Skunk if he would say a little bit about how did being abroad affect you? How did the band react to the culture in Moscow?
Well, I remember one very specific story. After we had finished our performance, I had brought a lot of equipment with me because I realized, or at least I thought in the beginning before I went, that I would want to give it all away. I knew that there was a dearth of technology for making music in the Soviet Union, so I brought as much stuff with me as I could to give away. And I had given away pretty much everything I had to different members of the different bands that were appearing on stage, the Russian band, Soviet bands as well. And at the end of the evening, a young gentleman walked up to me and said, I like your sound. Do you have anything that can help me make your sound? When I looked around, and I found one kind of beat up effects guitar pedal, and I gave it to him. And he looked at me and he reached up around his neck and he pulled a gold crucifix off of his neck and handed it to me. And I said, wait, look, there's KGB all over the stage here. Don't do that. You might get in trouble. He says, I don't care. I don't care. The ability and the opportunity to hear and maybe play what you're playing means more to me than the possibility of being punished. Now, it's sort of reference to what the other gentleman was saying. I know that there were times when I played rock and roll and I played in bands that there were a lot of folks that weren't that pleased, certainly regionally, in some cases even locally. But I was never the victim of state-sponsored oppression to the creative path that I had taken. And I was now face-to-face with someone who had epitomized and personified that for me in a very personal way. So as I went on to tour in many different places around the world. To me, it was not just a one-way street. It was the opportunity to meet people from other cultures, absorb what they were not only doing creatively, but also try to absorb what they were talking about philosophically. Because in a way, the ability to tour the world, and it's not just music, but actors do it, artists, painters, authors, the ability to open a new door to communication between peoples around the world is a tremendous, tremendous opportunity. And it certainly, after that experience in Moscow, changed my life.
I just wanted to add on because you mentioned exchanges, and I'd say from having been at the State Department and just in terms of my own background, I spent a junior year abroad. I have to say the exchange programs are really very much the essence of soft power. And as you, I think, rightly pointed out, it's not just about us going to other locations, but when there are those visitors that come here, and in terms of the sharing of experiences, of backgrounds, etc. And I just want to give one example of a program that was maybe an eye-opener for me, and that was Congressman B. Ryder launched a program, naturally being from the state of Nebraska. He was focused on farmers, and he launched a farmer-to-farmer program. So I went to Iowa to meet all these farmers who were signed up to go out of the United States to Ukraine. Do you know that the majority of them had never been out of the United States, and that was their first visit? But they went, and also there was the issue of language. But you know what? You don't even have to speak Ukrainian, or the farmers on the other side don't need to speak English. You know, they're going to observe how they have certain techniques of farming. And they did have translators, but the short of it is they had them going in one direction, and then they invited them to their homes, and because they stayed at their homes, at their farms, and then they invited them to Iowa back. And there were some real bonds that were forged, and also some real expertise that was well shared and well used. So the exchanges are, I would say, very, very potent instruments. Not just only in rock and roll.
Thank you very much. With Chris is my name, from Nigeria. I'm actually coming from a different background, coming from an African background, because I've been hearing rock and roll, I've been hearing the soft powers and stuff like that. I really want to understand. It's not yet clear for me. You rightly said the definition of soft power in today's world is like the social media, where information is passed to the channel, to the society through this, through the Facebook, the Twitter. Can I liken our own society to like our own soft power to advocates like the fella Anikulapo Kuti? I don't know whether you know him, who used his musical talents to drive messages to the betterment of the society. Is that what you mean by a soft power?
Of course. I mean, what I mean by soft power is, and I'm glad you cut in, because we definitely want to get out of the comfort zone of Europe and America. Our understanding of soft power is that it's universal, and what I'm trying to say is that we gave an example, but that example is valid for any continent, any culture, and obviously it's valid for Nigeria and other countries as well. Let me just give you an example. Nobody thinks about the incredible impact of Iranian rock and roll music on the mindset of the Iranian people, and nobody thinks about how important that kind of music is as we speak in Iran, to deliver a message of change and a message of freedom and democracy, and that is obviously true for you. So that's why I said, think about rock and roll as a metaphor. Don't be. It's not a rigid thing, and I'm definitely not advocating that it's quote unquote Western rock and roll music that should be thought of as the single and the best tool for all countries. But it is definitely something that carries a message that is useful for any society in order to improve any society. So that's the way I understand it. Paula?
I had mentioned in my earlier comments about how Joe Nye in his own book defines it. So I'm going to just expand a little bit on what you said. He actually provides the definition, and the definition, he says, is what is soft power? It means that, I have something that I am sharing with you that you find very attractive. You find it appealing. Maybe it is that form of music. Maybe it is something that I might share about, as I mentioned, in the health area, for example, something practical that your society needs. So it's a form of sharing, it's a form of attractiveness, and then it's a kind of influence, and hence the word power and soft. So I think, the Ambassador Simonyi was expanding it to the modern day. And what are all the other kinds of instruments we have, as you mentioned, the Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, because a lot of people will have images, and they're going to form images based on what they see. So that was sort of the connection there.
Sorry, if I
No,
may,
no.
if I may come in,
Please.
maybe I have a soft power, but I've not really realized I have a soft power. Yes, from what you're actually saying, while I was in the college, I came up with a program called the Nigerian Campus Marathon. The Campus Marathon is a sports program designed for university students to preach the message against crime, against campus cultism, against examination malpractice, and stuff like that. And when we first launched that program, it was like, I want to run. You see the university, the teachers, the lecturers, you see the non-academic staff, you see the students, you see the vice chancellor. Everybody wants to run. And we got something that day. Some set of students who, when we call them the negative type students, they are in fraternity, stuff like that. One of them decided to take part in that activity. And his friends called him, hey, please, there's this stubborn kid that is trying to, show himself. So he refused. He joined us. And his friends went and fought the other kid, which led to the expulsion of his friends. But this young man participated. And he was my set. He was on a graduating class that year. So you see that the program he participated saved him from being expelled from the university. He also benefited, and the other ones that didn't participate were all expelled at their final level. So from this comparison, it shows that I have something that actually drives a message against crime in the society without necessarily knowing that I have the soft power.
Yes, absolutely. I think we would all agree that you're giving a great example of that. Really a great example. Oh.
Call in, please.
While they're doing that, if I may give you, as you were speaking, you reminded me of a situation, if I could share with all of you, kind of bridging stardom and music, if you will, with soft power. When I was at the State Department, the singer Ricky Martin. Am I correct? People know Ricky Martin. So Ricky Martin came to my office and he said, I would like to help with the issue of trafficking in persons. And, we said to him, all right, well, what in particular? Well, I speak Spanish, I'm a musician, and I think that I can be helpful in Latin America. Well, my view was immediately, of course. I mean, here, in terms of just his being, he would be an instrument of soft power because, you have so many young kids who are looking to him as a musician. He's well known. And for him to be speaking in Spanish and saying about, you need to be aware and educated about trafficking and trafficked victims, trafficking of human beings. He did this, and I have to tell you, he had such influence. People are going to want to listen, and younger people would want to listen to him. They aren't going to want to listen to a State Department bureaucrat. It's not interesting, and it would be influential. So that's on one example. You gave a beautiful example in terms of yourself and what you've done in terms of the campus and really influencing, corruption, as you said.
We have 5 more minutes, so let's use the time as best possible, please. Welcome back, Skunk.
My name is Zeke. I just want to make a very short statement and ask you to comment on my statement. It's my understanding and belief that soft power is a mechanism devised by powerful, rich, and mighty nations whenever they are sick and tired of using their smart bombs against those who are not that powerful. And having said that, I do believe that poor, impoverished, developing nations may not be interested in the exercise of what you call soft power because they don't need that. What do you think about that?
Well, I'll go first. I totally disagree with what you've said. I genuinely believe that in all of these areas, there are many reasons and many factors as to why and how soft power exists. I gave the example of the health area where I can really document for you, and not just avian influenza, malaria in South Africa, Southern Africa, by just the purchase of malaria nets and sharing malaria nets, which has made a difference in the thousands of lives, millions of lives actually across Southern Africa. So no, I have to disagree. I think that it does have to do with, I think, a significant recognition that we're very much intertwined internationally, that what happens in one country can influence another country. You don't have to be rich or poor or developed or developing, but if you have a circumstance in your country and it's a health issue, it's an environmental issue, it's a human rights issue, it's a conflict, it's going to affect your neighborhood, it's going to affect others. It's going to affect...
Paula?
Yeah.
Yeah. You hear us? Jeff? Hello?
I was just trying to answer the question or comment on his question. Can you hear us, Jeff?
A little bit, yeah. I think the gentleman is absolutely, completely, and utterly wrong. As a matter of fact, soft power and hard power are hard power is defined as what comes from the barrel of a gun. And when you talk about rich and powerful societies, most rich and powerful societies rule and get their power from authority and the monopoly of violence. Soft power is the opportunity for anyone to be able to have influence on what they believe, and that's why most authoritarian governments are scared to death of the creative process. This is an opportunity of leveling the playing field for anyone, no matter what their social level, economic level, or educational level is, to have a say and to have input. It's a tremendous opportunity.
Let me add my voice of total disagreement with you. And we'll promise we will not beat you up after this conference. I want to say that, first of all, you should understand, soft power existed before the term was coined. We didn't know what it is, and it had an incredible positive impact. Second, I totally agree with Paula and Skunk. It's empowerment. Soft power is the empowerment not of the rich. It is the empowerment of the people. It's the empowerment of including poor people. So you look at it this way. It's a tool that you can and you should use for the betterment of your society. And third, think of it this way. One of the most beautiful tools of soft power was Live Aid. The Live Aid concert. Trust me, this was not invented by any government. This was not invented by any rich guy. It was invented by people who care about Africa, who cared about the famine in Africa, who wanted to help out, who wanted to help you send a strong message about there is a problem, and world, listen, there are people suffering, and we want to use our soft power to get this message through. So I want to caution you not to jump to conclusions. And just because we happen to come from the part of the world which you would call the rich part of the world, please understand that what we are trying to say, and that's what we have been trying to say for about an hour, is that this really is a universal tool which works best if it is not part of a government mechanism. It's okay if governments use it, but it's not a government tool as such. It's far more than that. It embraces people-to-people contacts. It embraces individuals, as Skunk said. It embraces different cultures, and that's really the way you should look at it. I think we'll just have to take a few more questions because I know you're running out of time. Yes, please.
Yes. When I made my comment or statement, I was not trying to reject the importance of soft power. And your comment to my statement proves that I was right, because in all you said, it shows that soft power is something, after all, is most likely to be exercised by somebody in a position of power to empower somebody who is in a position of weaknesses. And that's what I heard. And so,
okay, well, probably we will have to repeat it. But I think what Chris just said is proof that of the opposite. And then we have the one last question. Chris, your comment first, and then the lady. And we'll wrap up.
I really want to add my voice to the understanding of our speakers here, the panelists. What I feel is the soft power concept is the demand of the society, is the demand of the neighborhood, the community. You see, I want to believe that the focus or channeling our demands to the government reduces our strength as a people. There are divisions of labor. There are ones individuals can do, and there are ones governments can do. And if you leave the ones you as an individual will do and focus on government to come and do it, you see that even when the government comes, you yourself as an individual will never appreciate what government is doing. That is why we have the neighborhood watch, which is another form of soft power. Let's come together and make sure that this neighborhood is safe. It's not because of government, because they are hard targets. Governments are hard targets. I don't want to believe that anybody can come now, go to the White House and kill Obama. He is a hard target. Before he dies, like 1 million of us must have died. So we must consider that fact. Let's secure ourselves first before the president. So the soft power concept, I strongly supported that is as a result of the demand of our individual communities, because there are peculiarities. Everything must not be globalized. Based on the peculiarity of your community comes whatever soft power strategy you want to adopt. Thank you.
Thank you, Chris. And then the last question, the lady.
Thank you so much for your time. My name is Basma Trebi and I'm Egyptian. I'm very much interested in the topic because I've done some research on soft power in the Middle East, and the fact that I'm infatuated with such a topic because I believe that there is some sort of agreement nowadays between the Western culture and the Eastern culture in trying to find a room in between to have this dialogue that's not limited to governments or NGOs. It's more jewelry, even fashion. You can find the effective fashion of different cultures in Paris Fashion Runway or even in Japan, in Tokyo. You can see this fact that there is a merge between cultures, that you can no longer relate or define a specific unit or a product based on its country of origin. And as an Egyptian, I can find this in fashion, in Egyptian fashion nowadays, between European at the same time. It's part Arab / Islamic / Coptic cultures, and you can find Arab rap bands, Arab rock and roll bands. You can find names that are like, you can find instead of gigs, you'd find like there is such a thing called the Sawi Culture Wheel in Cairo, where it's like an open mic area. Anyone can go and perform. Anyone. What kind of music you have, what kind of poetry, what kind of art. There are free exhibits, and you can go and express yourself regardless of what you present, regardless the culture that you've been raised in. You are entitled to express yourself. I do agree that Zaki, right? I think Zaki, that it's a privilege to have soft power. It's not limited to those who have power, but it's a privilege to those who are entitled to empower others. The way I understood his point is that it's not limited to specific people, but it is a privilege in itself. Not all the people have this. I as an Egyptian, there are people who are able to get some sort of education and that they can express themselves in gigs, maybe on Facebook, on Twitter, or anything. Some people are not entitled for such a thing. That's why they're not capable of having the space to express their soft power. That's what I understood from his point. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm right, but
you're right.
No, it's not. I'm not like, I'm in between. I understand the point perfectly fine. That it's a way of expression, regardless of affiliation. It's just expressing yourself regardless of what you believe in, what you don't believe in, but it's not entitled for everyone. So you have to create the room for it. Either if it's utilized or utilized by states, then it's a form of soft power for a specific direction. And if it's for bands, then it's for all the people. And if it's for fashion, then it's for women empowerment. You know what I mean? It's how you maneuver and it's how you utilize this that makes a message out of it. So I'm like, I get the point. The extremes, they're like, I find myself in the middle.
Oh, this is really good. A last word to conclude. Jeff, you go first. Yes.
Well, again, I think a perfect example of soft power is the termination of the Vietnam War in the United States. And the influence of American culture on the government is unmistakable. And for anyone to think that the purveyors of that culture, the musicians who were responsible for taking advantage of that soft power, and to think that those musicians were only from the privileged classes is a tremendous misunderstanding.
Great. Paula?
As you were speaking, I was thinking back on your point, and I'll end on that note. I think that actually, in a way, you actually proved, in my mind, that, as we've all been discussing here, soft power can be where government does influence soft power or engages soft power, but it could be a group or it could be an individual, as both Jeff and Andras have mentioned. It doesn't have to be someone who is wealthy or empowered. It can be someone who isn't. And if I may say, in listening to Chris before, when he said he came up with this idea, he came up with the idea. You can come up wherever you're sitting with an idea. The issue is, what are your terms of reference around you? It's not an issue, in my mind, of have or have nots. It's what you said before about what freedom you have, even if you don't have all the resources at your fingertips. If you have the ability to go and to try to do something, you can make a difference. I'll give an example, a quick one in wrapping up. It was interesting to me, I was following and speaking about women. There's a woman who, in Mexico, she had no involvement in politics. And by the way, she comes from a very, very poor community. She got herself bit by bit involved, and by actually just an interest in engaging. And you know what? She's now a force to be reckoned with, because she's someone who became head of, if you know about her, head of a political party. You don't have to have all these resources, as you were saying, behind you to have the power and the will to be attractive, to come up with good ideas, and to influence and impact others. She's a good example of it. It just, you have to have motivation. You do have to have creativity. There are elements that I think we've all mentioned here. I'm not saying life is perfect. It's not. But I think that there are opportunities there. I wouldn't categorically put things the way you did. It's almost like you have no chance of doing anything anywhere.
Yes. I just want to, we have to conclude because Mark Donford is so nervous and he will cut the wires here. But, you know, I don't want to.
We'll see the exertion of hard power.
Yes, he's going to throw a bomb, and that's, you will see the difference between soft power and hard power. We're really soft compared to that. But I just want to say I was fascinated. Well, thank you very much for the comments. I was fascinated by the comments. I must say both of you were very interesting. While we disagree, it was very interesting to hear your comment. And I really was happy to hear this voice from Egypt. And trust me, the three of us, we're a lot closer to you than you think. Skunk, I really want to thank you for being with us. This was terrific. Good to see you, man. This is, you know, hope to see you in Washington soon.
Pleasure's mine, folks. And Paula and Andras, thanks for the opportunity.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Paula, Ambassador Dobrianski, thank you for joining us. And I really want to thank the audience as well for the fabulous questions. Thank you so much.